In the sun-scorched heart of Texas, a deadly game of deception is about to explode into violence. When the notorious Raven Gang sets their sights on a quiet widow's ranch in Redemption Valley, they think they're dealing with just another helpless woman they can easily intimidate. They couldn't be more wrong. Sarah Carson isn't your typical rancher's widow. For 15 years, she was the most feared bounty hunter in the American West, bringing justice to places lawmen feared to tread. They called her Shadow Rose, a ghost that moved like midnight wind and struck with deadly precision. This isn't just another tale of Western justice. This is about how the most ruthless gang in Texas learned the hard way that some legends never fade. They just wait for the right moment to reveal themselves. When they started harassing the widow Carson, they didn't realize they were poking a sleeping mountain lion. What follows is the story of how one woman would dismantle an entire outlaw empire in just 7 days, using nothing but a modest ranch, decades of gunslinger experience, and the deadly skills that made her a legend. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn painted the Texas sky in shades of amber and gold as Sarah Carson walked her fence line, her calloused hands checking each post with practiced care. At 45, she moved with the fluid grace of a much younger woman, though she'd mastered the art of appearing more weathered when others were watching. Her modest ranch house sat on the horizon, a peaceful sight that belied the arsenal hidden beneath its floorboards. The morning routine was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Sarah's hand instinctively twitched toward her right hip, where a Colt peacemaker had rested for 15 years. Now that same hip carried only a simple work knife, at least where people could see. The riders turned out to be local ranchers, Henry and Dale Thompson, their faces grim with fresh news. "Morning, Sarah," Henry called out, reining his horse to a stop. "Heard about the Miller place?" Sarah straightened, brushing dust from her apron. "What about it?" "Burned to the ground last night. Martha Miller and her boys barely got out." Dale's voice carried the weight of unspoken implications. "Third widow's ranch hit this month." Sarah's expression remained carefully neutral, but her mind was already calculating. 3 widows' ranches, all similar patterns. Not random, not opportunistic. Someone was targeting specific properties with specific owners. "Ravens?" she asked. Though she already knew the answer, Henry nodded grimly. "Getting bolder too. Sheriff won't do anything, says there's no proof." Sarah felt the familiar weight of her hidden holster against her ribs, remembered the feel of her specialized rig that could draw and fire faster than any man she'd ever met. 15 years of bringing down the worst outlaws in the territory, all buried under the persona of a simple widow. "Martha need anything?" she asked, instead of what she really wanted to know. "She's staying with her sister in town," Dale replied. "But Sarah might be worth considering their offer when they come." Her eyes hardened for just a moment before she caught herself. "Appreciate the warning, Dale, but this land was Jack's dream. I'm not selling." As the men rode away, Sarah allowed herself a moment of reflection. Jack Carson had been a good man, a real rancher who'd fallen in love with a bounty hunter trying to leave her violent past behind. He'd known exactly who and what she was, loved her anyway. His death 3 years ago had been natural, a fever that took him in his sleep, but it had left her vulnerable in ways she hadn't expected. The community saw only his widow, someone to protect or exploit. Inside her house, Sarah moved a particular floorboard, revealing a hidden compartment. Her gun belt lay there, well-oiled and maintained, the Colt peacemaker modified for speed and accuracy. Beside it sat newspaper clippings, wanted posters, and a small leather-bound book recording every bounty she'd ever brought in. Shadow Rose. The name had struck fear into outlaws from Mexico to Canada. A shadow passed her window. Tommy, the young ranch hand she'd hired more for appearance than need. 17, eager to learn and too observant for his own good. She'd caught him watching her sometimes, especially when she moved too quickly or reacted to sounds too fast. He suspected something, but his youth made others discount his intuition. "Miss Carson?" Tommy called from outside. "Got those fence posts set like you asked." "Thank you, Tommy," she responded, her voice carrying the soft drawl she'd cultivated to hide her original New England accent. "Why don't you head into town, pick up supplies? Might want to check on Martha Miller while you're there." As his horse's hoofbeats faded, Sarah began her real morning routine. Hidden targets behind the barn, draw practice that would have amazed anyone who saw it. She might be retired, might want nothing more than to tend her ranch in peace, but she wasn't fool enough to let her skills rust. The sound of approaching riders made her freeze. These weren't the steady hoofbeats of ranchers or townspeople. These were the rhythms of men trying to be quiet, trying to surprise someone. Sarah quickly replaced the targets, adjusted her apron to hide any sign of exertion, and picked up her garden shears just as the first rider came into view. 3 men, well armed but trying to look casual. Their horses were good stock, their guns well maintained, not common bandits. The lead rider wore a black hat with a raven's feather tucked in the band. Their reputation preceded them. The Raven Gang had been terrorizing the territory for months, but always careful to maintain a veneer of legitimate business. Sarah hunched her shoulders slightly, made herself look smaller, more uncertain. The act had fooled countless marks in her bounty hunting days. Now it served a different purpose. "Mrs. Carson," the leader called out, his voice friendly, but his eyes cold as winter ice. "Beautiful morning for gardening." Sarah stood in her garden, shears gripped loosely as the 3 ravens dismounted. Her mind catalogued details with practiced precision. Remington rifle on the lead rider's saddle, worn on the right side. He favored his left hand for quick draws. Second man carried a shotgun, poorly concealed under his duster. Third held his reins wrong. City man playing cowboy, probably their money connection. "Mr. Blackwood," she nodded to the leader, letting a slight tremor enter her voice. "What brings the Raven Gang to my humble ranch?" James Blackwood removed his hat, revealing steel-gray hair and a face weathered by sun and violence. His smile never reached his eyes. "Now, Mrs. Carson, no need for such formality. We're all neighbors here. Been making the rounds, checking on the local widows after that terrible business at the Miller place." "Very neighborly of you." Sarah kept her tone carefully neutral, noting how the men had spread out in a practiced pattern. They'd done this before, probably dozens of times. "Though I heard it was your men who burned Martha's ranch." The smile had tightened fractionally. "Nasty rumors, Mrs. Carson. Times are hard. People look for someone to blame. Truth is, we're here to help. Territory's changing. Small ranches like yours, they're becoming vulnerable." Tommy's horse appeared on the horizon, returning too early. Sarah silently cursed. The boy's protective instincts would get him killed if he wasn't careful. The ravens noticed her glance, turned to look. "Your ranch hand?" Blackwood asked unnecessarily. "Seems young." "Old enough to work," Sarah replied, shifting slightly to keep all 3 men in view. "His father worked this land with my husband." The city man spoke up, his accent definitely Eastern. "Speaking of your land, Mrs. Carson, we're prepared to make a very generous offer, 3 times market value, cash in hand." Sarah pretended to consider it, watching Tommy approach. The boy had definitely improved his riding since she'd started secretly training him. He sat his horse properly now, balanced for quick dismounts if needed. "This land was my husband's dream," she said finally. "Not for sale at any price." Blackwood's expression hardened. "Dreams change, Mrs. Carson. Sometimes they turn into nightmares. Shame what happened to the Miller place. Accidents happen so easily out here." Tommy reached them, his young face tight with barely controlled anger. Sarah saw his hand drift toward his belt and silently prayed he remembered her lessons about choosing the right moment. "Everything all right, Miss Carson?" he asked, eyes fixed on Blackwood. "Just fine, Tommy. These gentlemen were leaving." She put just enough steel in her voice to make it clear the conversation was over, but not enough to seem threatening. Blackwood mounted up, every movement deliberate. "Think about our offer, Mrs. Carson. We'll be back in a week for your answer. Would hate to see any accidents happen to such a fine piece of land." As they rode away, Sarah watched their departure through narrowed eyes. Their horses kicked up dust that caught the morning light, creating an ominous haze. "They're going to come back hard," Tommy said quietly. "I know what they did to the Miller place. Should have shot them right here." Sarah turned to him, saw the fury and fear warring in his young face. "Violence isn't always the answer, Tommy." "Sometimes it is," he responded, and for a moment he sounded so much like Jack, it made her heart ache. "I've seen you, you know, when you think no one's watching. The way you move, the way you watch everything. You're not just a rancher's widow." Her first instinct was to deny it, maintain her cover. But something in the boy's steady gaze made her reconsider. He'd been loyal, learned quick, and kept her secrets without even knowing what they were. "No," she said finally, "I'm not. But right now, I need to be." Understanding the difference between when to fight and when to wait, that's more important than being quick with a gun. "They'll hurt people," Tommy insisted. "More widows will lose their ranches." Sarah walked to her porch, sat heavily in the rocking chair Jack had built. "Tell me what you saw in town. Everything, especially about Martha Miller." As Tommy reported, Sarah's mind worked through scenarios. The Ravens were professional in their intimidation, which made them more dangerous than common bandits. They had political connections, money behind them. This wasn't just about land. They were systematically taking control of the territory. A distant rumble of thunder matched her darkening thoughts. Storm clouds were gathering, both literally and figuratively. She'd left the violence of her past behind for Jack, built a peaceful life. But as she watched more clouds roll in from the horizon, Sarah Carson knew that peace might have just become a luxury she could no longer afford. The wind carried the smell of rain and smoke, the latter from the direction of the Miller Ranch. Soon it would wash away the evidence of the Ravens' latest crime, just like it had all the others. But this time, something was different. This time, they'd threatened the wrong widow. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Sarah's porch when Marshal John Hawkins rode up, his badge gleaming dully against his dust-covered coat. She recognized his approach, deliberate, measured, making sure she saw him coming. Some habits never changed, even after 15 years. "Been a while, John," she said quietly, not moving from her rocking chair. The marshal dismounted slowly, his movements betraying old injuries from shared battles long ago. "Sarah, still trying to pretend you're just a rancher's widow?" "Not pretending. That's who I am now." He snorted, leaning against the porch rail. "Tell that to the 2 Ravens I found unconscious by Miller's place. Professional takedowns, minimal bruising, nothing traced back to the attacker. Reminded me of someone I used to know." Sarah kept her face neutral, though inside she cursed. She'd been sloppy, letting old instincts take over when she'd caught them setting the fire. "Lot of people know how to fight, John. Not like that, not like Shadow Rose." He kept his voice low, though they were alone. "Your legend's still out there, Sarah. Every time some gunslinger gets too quick with their trigger, they whisper about the woman who could outdraw any man alive." "Legends belong in the past." She stood, moved to pour them both coffee. "What really brings you here?" Hawkins accepted the cup, his expression grim. "Ravens are just the surface. Something bigger's coming. Judge Morton's been bought. That's why nothing sticks to them. Banks are calling in loans on specific properties, all owned by widows or aging ranchers. Someone's consolidating power, using the Ravens as muscle." Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the one that used to precede a hunt. How high does it go? State level, maybe higher. Railroads involved somehow. He paused, studying her. I've got no proof, no witnesses willing to talk. Even if I did, can't trust the local law. Sheriff's been paid off. Deputies too scared to move against the Ravens. Not your problem anymore, John. You're retiring, remember? He smiled sadly. That's why I'm here. Next marshal they send won't know you, won't understand what's really happening. When the Ravens push harder, and they will, there won't be anyone left to stand between them and their targets. Sarah moved to the window, watched Tommy exercising her horses in the corral. The boy had natural talent, the same fire she'd seen in herself at that age. I hung up my guns for a reason. Because of Jack, Hawkins said softly. He was a good man, understood what you were trying to leave behind. He helped me become someone else, someone better. And now? A rifle shot cracked in the distance. Target practice from the Ravens' camp near town. Sarah's hand twitched instinctively, muscle memory from countless duels. Martha Miller's got 3 young boys, Hawkins continued. Ravens burned everything they had. Next time they might not be so lucky. Territory's changing, Sarah. Question is, are you going to watch it happen, or are you going to do something about it? Doing something about it is what I left behind, but even as she said it, Sarah felt the old fire stirring. Violence only breeds more violence. Hawkins stood, set his coffee down. Sometimes peace needs teeth. You taught me that, back when. Shadow Rose was more than just a legend. He moved to his horse, mounted with the careful dignity of an aging lawman. Ravens will be back. When they come, remember, you're not just protecting your ranch anymore. Whole territory's watching even if they don't know it. As he rode away, Sarah closed her eyes, remembering. 15 years of bringing justice to lawless places, building the legend of Shadow Rose one bounty at a time. Then Jack with his quiet, strength and simple dreams, showing her another way to live. But the Ravens had changed the equation. It wasn't just about her peace anymore. Martha Miller's boys, Tommy's future, every widow and honest rancher in the territory, they were all caught in the coming storm. Thunder rumbled again, closer now. Sarah moved to the hidden compartment, ran her fingers over the smooth grip of her peacemaker. Jack had never asked her to give up who she was, only to be more than what violence had made her. Maybe it was time to be both, the widow and the warrior, the rancher and the legend. The storm broke overhead, rain drumming on the roof like distant gunfire. Sarah Carson stood in her quiet house, feeling the weight of decisions yet to come. Peace had been her choice for 3 years. Now, it seemed, war was choosing her. The Ravens came at noon, when the sun was highest and shadows offered no place to hide. 6 riders this time, Blackwood in the lead, with his signature raven feather catching the light. Sarah counted weapons from her porch, 12 revolvers, 4 rifles, 2 shotguns. They weren't being subtle anymore. Tommy stood at the corral, his hand nervously touching the revolver she'd started teaching him to use. Sarah caught his eye, gave a slight shake of her head. Not yet. Mrs. Carson, Blackwood called out, his voice carrying artificial warmth. Hope you've had time to consider our generous offer. Sarah stepped off her porch, making sure to stumble slightly. Let them see weakness. Let them get comfortable. Mr. Blackwood, don't recall inviting you back so soon. The city man from before. Sarah now recognized him as James Morton, the judge's son, produced a document. We've taken the liberty of drawing up the sale papers, 3 times market value as discussed. Plus a bonus, Blackwood added, for quick cooperation. Unlike some other properties, we'd prefer this transaction remain peaceful. Sarah let her hands tremble as she took the papers, but her mind was cataloguing distances. Morton was 2, close to his shotgun, The man on the left had his rifle poorly secured. It would snag on his saddle if he tried to draw. Blackwood's new gun belt was still too stiff, would slow his draw by precious fractions of a second. "My husband," she began, but Blackwood cut her off. "Is dead, Mrs. Carson. Dead men's dreams don't keep a ranch running." His smile vanished. "Times are changing. Either change with them or—" A shot cracked the air. One of the ravens had fired into her water trough, sending splinters flying. Tommy reached for his gun. "Don't!" Sarah's voice cracked like a whip, freezing the boy in place. To the ravens, it looked like fear. To Tommy, who'd been learning from her, it was a command. Blackwood laughed. "Boy's got spirit. Shame if something happened to him. Accidents are common with young, hot-headed ranch hands." Sarah felt ice spread through her veins. They could threaten her land, her peace, even her life. But threatening Tommy, that crossed a line she couldn't ignore. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "we could discuss terms." "Nothing to discuss," Morton sneered. "Sign the papers or join Martha Miller in town, assuming you make it to town." Sarah made a show of reading the document, using the moment to note positions. 2 men had moved to flank her. One was watching Tommy too intently. Blackwood's hand rested casually on his gun. Then she saw it, movement in the trees behind her house. More ravens, trying to be stealthy. They'd planned this carefully, weren't taking chances with another widow's ranch. Smart. But it meant they considered her a serious threat, even if they didn't know why. "Problem is," she said slowly, letting her voice quaver, "I never learned to read proper. Could you explain these terms?" Morton sighed dramatically, dismounted to approach her. Just as she'd planned. His foot caught the edge of her porch step, the one she'd deliberately left loose that morning. As he stumbled, Sarah moved. 15 years of bounty hunting had taught her many tricks. The helpless stumble that turned into a fluid shoulder throw. The clumsy grab that became a wrist. Och! Before anyone could react, Morton was face down in the dirt, his own shotgun pressed against his back. "Now then," Sarah said, her voice suddenly clear and cold as mountain water, "let's discuss those terms again." The raven's hands went to their guns, but she'd chosen her position carefully. Morton made an excellent shield, and the crossfire would hit at least 2 of their own men. "You're making a mistake," Blackwood growled, but she saw the uncertainty in his eyes. This wasn't going according to plan. "No," Sarah replied calmly. "You made the mistake. Threatening Tommy? Bad decision." She pushed the shotgun harder into Morton's back. "Here are my terms. You ride away. All of you, including your friends in the trees. You don't come back. You don't threaten my ranch. You don't threaten Tommy. You think you can stand against all of us?" Morton spat dirt. "You're just one woman." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "Funny thing about that. Shadow Rose was just one woman too. Heard of her?" The change in the air was instant. Every raven knew that name, knew the stories. Blackwood's face went pale. "Shadow Rose is dead," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," Sarah agreed, "or maybe she just found something worth protecting. Either way, you boys need to ask yourselves, how lucky do you feel?" For a long moment, no one moved. Then Blackwood raised his hands slowly. "Release Mr. Morton. We'll discuss this situation another time." "Clock's ticking," Sarah warned, "and my arm's getting tired. Tired arms get twitchy." They backed away slowly, Morton scrambling to his horse once she released him. As they rode off, Sarah maintained her stance, shotgun ready. Only when they were out of sight did she lower the weapon. Tommy approached cautiously. That was something. That, Sarah sighed, was the end of peace and quiet. She handed him the shotgun. "Clean this. Then we're stepping up your training. Things are about to get complicated." Storm clouds gathered on the horizon as Sarah watched the Raven's dust trail fade. She'd managed to surprise them today, but they'd be back, and next time they'd come ready for war. The screams woke Sarah before dawn. Orange light flickered through her window, not sunrise but fire. Ellen Parker's ranch was burning. Sarah moved without thinking, muscle memory taking over. The hidden compartment opened silently, her gun belt settling around her waist like a forgotten embrace. The peacemaker's weight was familiar, comfortable in ways that should have disturbed her. "Miss Carson!" Tommy's voice urgent at her door. "The Ravens, saddle the horses," she cut him off. "And Tommy, bring my rifle." Ellen Parker was 63, her only crime being too stubborn to sell her land. Her ranch lay just over the ridge, close enough to see the flames clearly in the pre-dawn darkness. As they rode, Sarah heard gunshots, not the methodical destruction of property, but the desperate returning fire of someone fighting back. "They're not just burning her out," Tommy realized, his voice tight. "They're making an example." Sarah's response was cut short by a woman's scream. Ellen's daughter Jane had been visiting from back east. The Ravens wouldn't have expected resistance, wouldn't have known about the extra hands staying at the ranch. "Circle wide," Sarah ordered Tommy. "Get to the back of the ranch. When you hear things start, get the Parkers out. Don't try to fight." "What about you?" Sarah pulled her bandana up, covering the lower half of her face. "I'm done watching." The Ravens had brought their whole crew, at least 15 men surrounding the burning ranch house. They'd grown cocky after their earlier confrontation with Sarah, wanted to show the territory they couldn't be defied. Ellen and Jane Parker were trapped inside, returning sporadic fire from the windows. "Come on out, Mrs. Parker." Blackwood's voice carried over the crackling flames. "Fire or bullets, your choice." Sarah dismounted in the shadows, moved like a ghost through positions she'd already memorized. The first two Ravens never saw her coming. Swift strikes to nerve clusters, dropped them silently. The third managed a startled grunt before consciousness fled. "Someone's out there." A Raven raised his rifle, peering into darkness. Sarah's throw sent him sprawling into two companions, creating precious seconds of confusion. Then she stepped into the firelight, both revolvers drawn. "Evening, boys. Seems we need another discussion about manners." "Kill her!" Morton screamed, but Sarah was already moving. Shadow Rose hadn't become a legend through brutality or body count. Her reputation came from precision, from the ability to disarm and disable without killing. 2 shots knocked guns from hands. A third struck a support beam, sending a Raven diving for cover directly into her boot. The night erupted into chaos. Ravens fired wildly at shadows, while Sarah moved through their midst like a vengeful spirit. Every shot was deliberate. Gun hands, knees, weapons themselves. No killing strokes, but plenty of lessons about the price of violence. Tommy used the distraction perfectly, getting the Parkers out through the back door. Sarah caught glimpses of them running for the safety of the creek bed. "Witch!" Blackwood emptied his revolver at her, each shot going wide. "What are you?" Sarah's response was 2 rounds that disarmed him and the man beside him. "Just a widow, Mr. Blackwood, one you should have left alone." When it was over, 11 Ravens lay groaning in the dirt, their wounds painful but survivable. 4 had fled into the night. Morton and Blackwood stood backed against the burning house, their weapons gone, facing the woman they'd dismissed as helpless. "The territory's changing," Sarah said softly, echoing Blackwood's earlier words. "Either change with it or—" Her revolvers gleamed in the firelight. "Well, you know the rest. You can't fight all of us," Morton spat. "Father has connections. The Rangers won't find anything here but men who let their own fire get out of control." She nodded toward Tommy, who was already spreading coal oil on their discarded weapons. Tragic accident. Could happen to anyone. Dawn was breaking as Sarah watched the last Ravens ride away. The Parker ranch was scorched but standing. The fire hadn't spread past the outer walls. Ellen and Jane were shaken, but alive, their story already spreading through the territory. A masked woman with lightning hands appearing like a ghost to deliver justice. It's true then, Ellen said as Sarah checked her for injuries. Shadow Rose, all these years, you were right here. Sarah secured her bandana, became the widow Carson once more. Shadow Rose is a story, Mrs. Parker, but sometimes she looked toward the horizon where the ravens had fled. Sometimes stories are exactly what we need. Sarah cleaned her peacemaker in the pre-dawn light, each movement precise and practiced. The Parker Ranch incident had changed everything. Already, whispers spread through town about the masked defender, about Shadow Rose's return. Memories she'd buried deep came flooding back with each stroke of the cleaning cloth. 15 years ago, El Paso. Too slow, Sarah muttered, adjusting the specialized rig for the 100th time. The Cortez brothers were due in town tomorrow, and every fraction of a second would matter. 3 years of hunting them had taught her the cost of hesitation. You could wait for the Rangers, Marshal Hawkins had suggested, younger then but already carrying the weight of his badge seriously. Rangers want them dead, she'd replied, checking her aim in the mirror. I want them to face justice. Present-day Miss Carson. Tommy's voice brought her back. He carried 2 cups of coffee, offering one carefully. Riders coming. Looks like Marshal Hawkins. Sarah nodded, watching the sun climb. Word would have reached him by now about last night. The boy had proven himself during the fight, following orders perfectly, keeping his head when it mattered. Time for your next lesson, she said, motioning him to sit. Watch how the marshal approaches. Tell me what you see. Tommy studied the distant rider. He's, making sure we see him coming, staying visible. But he's also watching the ridgeline, checking his back trail. Good. Why? Because, Tommy's eyes widened slightly, because he knows you, knows how you think. Sarah smiled. The boy was learning fast. Man who hunts ghosts learns to watch shadows. John and I spent 3 years chasing the worst outlaws in the territory, taught each other a lot about staying alive. 15 years ago, El Paso, the Cortez brothers had lived up to their reputation. 3 banks robbed in 2 days, leaving a trail of dead lawmen. But Sarah had predicted their pattern, set her trap carefully. You're outnumbered, girl, Miguel Cortez had sneered, not recognizing the danger before him. Walk away. Her response had been 5 shots in under 2 seconds. No deaths. She'd built her reputation on bringing them in alive, but 5 men on the ground, their gun hands shattered. The legend of Shadow Rose was born that day, though the name would come later. Present day, sir, Tommy's voice sharpened. More riders, coming fast from town. Sarah was on her feet instantly, scanning the horizon. 6 riders moving hard, not ravens, their patterns were different. These men rode like professionals. Texas Rangers, she breathed, recognizing the bearing. John, what did you do? Marshal Hawkins reined in, his expression grave. Didn't have a choice, Sarah. Ravens filed complaints. Judge Morton's pushing for official investigation into last night. Convenient timing. They're claiming Shadow Rose is back, causing trouble, want the Rangers to hunt you down. He paused. Captain Wilson's leading them. Sarah felt ice in her veins. William Wilson had been a young ranger during the Cortez hunt, had resented her methods, her refusal to simply kill her targets. Now he was a captain, with a chance to settle old scores. Tommy, she called, get inside. Whatever happens, whatever you hear, stay there. The boy hesitated. Miss Carson, now Tommy, 15 years ago, the border. You're interfering with official business, Wilson had snapped, his rangers surrounding her. Cortez brothers are our jurisdiction. Your jurisdiction ends where justice begins, she'd replied, standing her ground. You want them dead, the law wants them tried. Law's not always justice, woman. Her smile had been cold. That's why Shadow Rose exists. Present day, the Rangers approached in perfect formation, Wilson leading them. He'd aged well, carried authority naturally now, his eyes fixed on Sarah with old recognition. Mrs. Carson, he said formally, Or should I say Shadow Rose? Captain Wilson, still hunting ghosts? God witnesses this time? Judge Morton's son himself identified you? Wilson's hand rested near his gun. 15 years ago you made me look like a fool. Not happening again. Sarah felt the weight of her hidden holster, knew she could draw faster than any of them, but that wasn't the answer. Not anymore. Lot of witnesses last night, she said calmly. All saying the same thing. Ranch hands fought off raiders during an attempted arson. Nothing about Shadow Rose. Mrs. Parker is a frightened widow who saw shadows in the dark, just like Martha Miller and Ellen Parker and all the others. The ravens have terrorized while the law looked away. Wilson's jaw tightened. You're under arrest. We'll sort out the truth in Austin. On whose authority? Marshal Hawkins stepped forward. Last I checked, Rangers need more than ghost stories. For arrest warrants, stay out of this, John. Can't do that. Mrs. Carson here is under federal protection, key witness in an ongoing investigation into land fraud and corruption. Take her now. You'll have to explain to a federal judge why you interfered. Sarah kept her face neutral, but inside she smiled. John had always been clever with paperwork, with finding legal ways to achieve justice. Some things never changed. Wilson looked between them, calculation clear in his eyes. This isn't over. Never is, Sarah agreed softly. Question is, Captain, which side of justice are you really on this time? The Rangers departed slowly, dignity intact but authority challenged. Sarah watched them go, remembering other confrontations, other choices. That won't hold them long, Hawkins said quietly. Long enough. Sarah turned to her house. Tommy, lessons over. Time to learn about strategy. The boy emerged, his young face thoughtful. The Rangers. They're not all on the right side, are they? Law and justice aren't always the same, Sarah replied, echoing words from long ago. That's why we have to be smarter, more careful. The Ravens will use them against us now. So, what do we do? Sarah smiled grimly. We give them exactly what they expect, a ghost story, one that'll make them wish they'd never heard of Shadow Rose. Strange accidents began plaguing the Ravens over the next week. Supply wagons found their wheels mysteriously loosened. Horses spooked at crucial moments. Ammunition stored in their camp somehow got wet, rendering it useless. Nothing could be traced back to any single cause or person. Ghosts, the Ravens whispered around their campfires. Shadow Rose's curse. Sarah watched their camp from the ridgeline, Tommy beside her learning the art of observation. What do you see? She asked quietly. They've doubled their guards, Tommy reported. But they're watching the wrong directions, looking out when they should be looking in. Good. What else? They're drinking more, jumping at shadows, and he squinted through the spyglass. Some of them are packing up, getting ready to leave. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Fear was spreading through their ranks exactly as she'd planned. 3 men had already deserted, carrying tales of supernatural vengeance to other outlaw camps. Miss Carson, Tommy hesitated. How are you doing it? I've been watching, but I never see you leave the ranch at night. That's the point, Tommy. Best tricks are the ones nobody sees. She took the spyglass, studied the camp. Sometimes the idea of Shadow Rose is more powerful than the reality. In town, Martha Miller's boys were telling anyone who'd listen about mysterious food deliveries appearing on their doorstep, about strangers who tried to harass their mother, suddenly finding themselves face down in the street with no memory of how they got there. Sarah moved through the town openly as the widow Carson, watching and listening. The Ravens were changing their patterns, becoming erratic. Blackwood hadn't been seen in days, holed up in the hotel drinking and plotting. They hit the Jenkins place last night, Marshal Hawkins reported, meeting her in the general store. His voice was pitched for her ears alone, or tried to. Someone had warned them, helped them prepare. Raiders found themselves facing a dozen armed ranchers instead of one old man. Communities fighting back, Sarah noted, pretending to examine fabric. Imagine that. Wilson's suspicious. Rangers are watching your ranch. Let them watch. Widow. Carson never leaves her property after dark. Everyone knows that. Hawkins smiled slightly. Everyone also knows Shadow Rose can be in two places at once. Stories are spreading. Ravens tried recruiting in Tombstone, found no takers. Seems no one wants to risk the ghost's attention. That evening, Sarah gave Tommy his most important lesson yet. "Want to know how I'm doing it?" she asked, leading him to the barn. Inside, she revealed her network. Martha Miller's oldest son, James, emerged from the shadows, along with Jane Parker and 3 other young people from around the territory. All wore dark clothes, all moved with the quiet grace. She'd been teaching them. Shadow Rose was never just one person, Sarah explained to Tommy's wide eyes. That was the secret. Everyone expected to find a single remarkable gunslinger. Nobody looked for a network of ordinary people working together. "You've been training them," James Miller stepped forward. "Every night for the past week. While the Ravens watch the ranch, we move through the territory, each of us learning to be the ghost." Sarah nodded. "The Ravens expect me to work alone. Their watchers track my movements, confirm the widow Carson never leaves her ranch. Meanwhile, Jane Parker finished, Shadow Rose seems to be everywhere at once, because she is." Tommy absorbed this, his tactical mind, so like Sarah's own, working through the implications. "That's why you wanted me visible at the ranch. I'm your alibi. Among other things, you're also ready to join them." Sarah drew a black bandana from her pocket. "If you want to." That night, 6 dark figures slipped out of Sarah's barn while she sat prominently on her porch, watched by hidden ranger observers. The Ravens' ammunition wagon caught fire in 4 places simultaneously. Their horses broke free, scattered into the night. Supplies vanished, no shots fired, no violence. Just the systematic dismantling of their operation by seemingly supernatural means. Ghosts don't leave tracks, Sarah had taught her students. They don't fight unless they have to. They create doubt, fear, uncertainty. That's more powerful than any gun. The next morning, 3 more Ravens deserted. In town, people walked taller, spoke more freely. Judge Morton found his office flooded with witness statements about Raven activities, too many to ignore. "It's working," Tommy reported, returning from his supply run. "Overheard Morton's son in the saloon. They're scared, Miss Carson." "Really? Scared?" Sarah watched the sunset paint the sky blood red. "Fear's a weapon, Tommy, but it's not the goal. Everything we've done, all the tricks and shadows, they're just preparation." "For what?" "For when they realize what's really happening, because scared men either run or they fight back twice as hard. Ravens are almost at that breaking point." She turned to him, her eyes serious. "Real test is coming. You ready for that?" Tommy straightened, touched the hidden bandana at his neck. "Yes, ma'am. We all are." Sarah nodded slowly. Her students were becoming something remarkable, not gunslingers or outlaws, but protectors. Shadow Rose wasn't just a legend anymore. It was becoming a symbol, a promise that justice could come from unexpected places. "Get some rest," she told Tommy. "Tomorrow, we push them over the edge." Sarah knew something was wrong the moment she saw Marshal Hawkins' horse galloping riderless past her ranch. The animal was lathered, wild-eyed, and there was blood on the saddle. "Tommy!" she called, already moving. "Get the medical kit to a barn, then ride for Jane Parker. Tell her to activate the network." She found Hawkins a mile down the trail, conscious but badly beaten. His face was a mass of bruises, but his eyes were sharp with urgent purpose. "Careful," he coughed as she helped him up. "They'll be watching." "Who?" "Rangers, but not Wilson's men. Different unit. Never saw their badges up close." He winced as she got him to his feet. "They caught me at the telegraph office. I found something, Sarah, something big. Back at the barn, Tommy helped clean Hawkins' wounds while Sarah kept watch. Jane Parker's people would be spreading word throughout the territory by now, watching for unfamiliar rangers. Railroad's just the beginning, Hawkins explained, his voice low. Land deeds, water rights, mineral claims, everything's being consolidated under shell companies. Ravens are just hired muscle, local distraction from the real operation. Sarah handed him water. How high does it go? State level, at least. Maybe federal. Judge Morton's been falsifying documents, backdating land claims, but he's just a man. Hawkins drew a crumpled paper from his boot. Found this in the telegraph office before they jumped me. List of properties marked for acquisition, signed by the governor himself. Sarah studied the document, her blood running cold. Every widow's ranch, every small farm and homestead in 3 territories was listed. The Ravens weren't just stealing land, they were helping orchestrate the biggest land grab in Texas history. There's more, Hawkins continued. Silver deposits, found in the hills north of here. Railroad's planning a new spur line through the valley. Anyone who owns this land when that becomes public gets rich, Sarah finished. And anyone who doesn't sell has an unfortunate accident, fire, bandits, whatever it takes. He grimaced. Those weren't regular rangers who caught me. They were mercenaries, professionals hired to clean up loose ends. Tommy, who'd been quietly listening, spoke up. That's why they're pushing so hard now. Once the railroad plan goes public. We couldn't prove anything, Sarah nodded, and Shadow Rose would just look like a criminal disrupting legitimate business. Movement outside caught her attention, riders approaching, but not from the direction of town. She recognized the disciplined formation, the military precision of their approach. Company, she warned. Tommy, get the marshal to the root cellar. Use the tunnel we prepared. Sarah, Hawkins grabbed her arm. There were names on that list, people involved in the conspiracy. Some of them, you won't like who's involved. Later, she said firmly. Tommy, go and send the signal. Minutes later, when the mercenaries arrived, they found only the widow Carson tending her garden. But across the valley, lanterns were being lit in specific patterns. Sarah's network was mobilizing, preparing for what was coming. The lead rider was different from the Ravens. Professional, cold, efficient. His smile never reached his eyes. Mrs. Carson, Captain James Price, Texas Rangers Special Division. We're looking for Marshal Hawkins. Haven't seen him since morning, Sarah replied calmly, noting their weapons, military issue, not standard ranger equipment. Something wrong. Just routine inquiries. Price dismounted smoothly, though since we're here, there's been talk about strange happenings, Shadow Rose sightings. Know anything about that? Just ghost stories. Interesting thing about ghosts, Price stepped closer. They tend to disappear when you shine enough light on them, when you dig deep enough into people's pasts. Sarah felt the threat behind his words. He knew something, or suspected enough to be dangerous. Found some interesting records in Austin, he continued, about a certain bounty hunter who disappeared 15 years ago, right around the time a quiet widow named Carson bought this ranch. Lots of widows in Texas. Lots of secrets, too. Price's hand rested casually on his gun. Governor's very interested in resolving this situation, offering pardons for past activities if certain parties cooperate. Alternatively, Sarah saw movement in her peripheral vision, Tommy signaling from the barn. Her network was in position. Alternatively, she said quietly, some secrets are best left buried. Like Marshal Hawkins? Price's smile turned cruel. Man should be more careful where he sticks his nose. Accidents happen so easily out here. Sarah's hand itched for her hidden gun, but she kept still. Not yet. You're right about one thing, Captain. Things do happen out here. She looked past him to the horizon. Sun's setting, gets dark quick in these parts. Is that a threat, Mrs. Carson? Just an observation. Dark brings out all sorts of things. Ghosts, shadows. She smiled slightly. Truth. Price's men were getting nervous, watching the growing shadows. They'd heard the stories about Shadow Rose, about mysterious accidents and disappearances. Remember, Captain, Sarah said softly, you came to my land. You threatened my people. Whatever happens next, you chose this ghost story. As if on cue, the first lantern signals began flickering in the distant hills. Price's men noticed, shifted. Uneasily, the web was spread. Now it was time to see what kind of spider they'd caught. By midnight, Captain Price's threats had evolved into a full military-style occupation. Mercenaries posing as rangers patrolled the valley roads, watching every movement. But they weren't the only ones watching. 12 men on rotation, Tommy reported, slipping into Sarah's barn through the hidden tunnel. Professional military training. They've got the main roads covered, but they don't know the back trails, Sarah finished. She studied the crude map they'd drawn on the barn. Wall marked with her network's positions. What else? Jane Parker spotted more riders coming from Austin. Different group, real rangers this time, Wilson's men. Tommy hesitated. And Miss Carson? They brought someone else. A man who says he knows you. Sarah felt her past rushing, up like a dark tide. Describe him. Tall, silver hair, missing 2 fingers on his left hand. Carries a bronze pocket watch with a rose engraved on the case. Sarah closed her eyes. Jacob Rose, my father. The revelation hit Tommy like a physical blow. But I thought that I was just another bounty hunter who took the name Shadow Rose. She smiled sadly. Family business, Tommy. Papa was the original Shadow before the war between the states. Taught me everything I know about justice and secrets. A horse nickered outside. Their warning signal. Through the barn slats, Sarah watched Marshal Hawkins approach, still moving stiffly from his injuries. Your father's asking questions in town, he reported without preamble, telling stories about the real Shadow Rose, about why she disappeared 15 years ago. Sarah's hand went to her hidden holster. What kind of stories? About a bounty hunter who fell in love with her target, who chose to let a guilty man go free. Hawkins met her eyes. About Jack Carson. Tommy looked between them, understanding dawning. Mr. Carson, your husband, he was a Confederate raider turned bank robber, Sarah said quietly. My last target, the one Shadow Rose never brought in. Her voice softened with memory. He'd changed already, was trying to make an honest life, but the bounty still stood. So you chose love over justice, Hawkins said. Disappeared together, became Sarah and Jack Carson. Papa never forgave me. Said I betrayed everything Shadow Rose stood for. She touched the rose engraving on her gun grip. Now he's here to expose me, prove I'm not worthy of the legacy. Movement outside interrupted them. One of Price's patrols passing close to the barn. They waited in silence until the riders passed. Network still in position, Tommy reported. But Miss Carson, if your father tells people about Mr. Carson, the governor's men will have their proof. Sarah's mind raced through implications. They'll paint me as a criminal, discredit everything we've done to protect the valley. There's more, Hawkins added. That list I found, Jack Carson's name was on it, as a government informant from 15 years ago. The revelation hit Sarah like a bullet. Jack, her Jack, had been working with the very forces they were now fighting. Had he known about the land grab, the silver? Had their entire life together been— No, she said firmly, seeing the doubt in Tommy's eyes. Jack changed. Whatever he was before, whatever deals he made, he died protecting this land, protecting me. Time's running out, Hawkins warned. Price's men are getting impatient. Wilson's. Rangers want answers, and your father will do what he thinks is right, Sarah finished, just like I will. She moved to the barn door, watched the moon cast shadows across her land. Everything she'd built, everything she'd tried to protect, was balanced on the edge of a knife. Miss Carson. Tommy's voice was quiet but firm. What Jack Carson was, it doesn't change who you are, what you've done for us. Sarah turned to him, saw the unwavering loyalty in his young face. The boy had become more than a student. He was the future she was fighting for. You're right, Tommy. It doesn't change who I am. She drew her gun, checked it with practiced care. But it changes how we fight. No more shadows, no more hiding. Sarah, Hawkins warned, if you expose yourself. Shadow Rose was never about hiding, John. It was about justice, about standing up when no one else would. She strapped on her gun belt openly. Time to remind them why the legend began. Outside, more. Riders were approaching. She recognized the gates, Wilson's Rangers, her father probably among them. The moment of truth was coming. Tommy, signal the network. Tell them to stand ready, but hold position. She handed him a sealed envelope. If anything happens to me, get this to Jane Parker. It's everything we know about the conspiracy, with proof. Nothing's going to happen to you, Tommy said fiercely. Sarah smiled, touched his shoulder. Hope not. But Shadow Rose taught me something important. Sometimes the biggest victories come from being willing to lose everything for what's right. The riders were close now. Sarah stepped out of the barn, into the moonlight, no longer hiding who and what she was. Let them come. The mercenaries, the corrupt rangers, even her own father. Some ghosts, she'd learned, were more powerful in the light than in shadow. Jacob Rose dismounted first, his silver hair gleaming in the moonlight. At 65, he still moved like the legend he'd been, every step measured and deliberate. The bronze watch chain glinted at his vest, its rose emblem catching the light. "Hello, Sarah," he said quietly. Or should I say Shadow Rose? Behind him, Captain Wilson and his rangers spread out in a careful arc. Price's mercenaries emerged from the shadows, completing the circle. Sarah stood alone in the yard, feeling Tommy's presence in the barn behind her, knowing her network watched from hidden positions throughout the valley. "Been a long time, Papa." She kept her hands visible away from her guns. "Still wearing Mama's. Watch, I see. Still wearing my guns, I see." His eyes went to her holster. "Though you lost the right to those 15 years ago." Wilson stepped forward. "Mrs. Carson, you're under arrest for impersonating a law officer, interfering with official business, and letting a guilty man go free." Sarah cut him off. "That what you're really here for, Captain? Or did the governor send you to clean up his land grab operation?" The accusation hung in the air. She saw uncertainty flicker across some rangers' faces, good men who didn't know they were being used. "Careful, girl," Jacob warned. "These aren't your common outlaws. Walk away now. Let the law handle this." Like the law handled Martha Miller's ranch, Ellen Parker's. She raised her voice, making sure every man could hear. "Tell them, Papa. Tell them what Shadow Rose really means. What we were supposed to stand for. Justice," he spat. "Not protecting criminals, not falling in love with targets." Jack changed. Became a good man. Good enough to inform on his old partners. Price's cold voice cut in. Good enough to make deals with the governor's office? Sarah didn't let the barb land. Good enough to die protecting this land, this community. She turned in a slow circle, meeting the ranger's eyes. "You all know what's happening here? Honest ranchers burned out, widows terrorized. Also, some men in Austin can get rich when the railroad comes through." "That's enough," Wilson snapped, drawing his gun. "You're coming with us." The sound of multiple hammers cocking echoed through the night, but not from the rangers, from the shadows around them. One by one, figures emerged. Tommy from the barn, Jane Parker from behind the house, James Miller and others from the darkness. Each wore a black bandana, each carried a steady gun. Shadow Rose was never just one person, Sarah said into the stunned silence. It was an idea. That justice doesn't just come from badges or guns. It comes from people standing together. Against the law? Jacob challenged. Against corruption. Against men who use the law to steal and kill. She finally met her father's eyes. You taught me that, Papa. Before the war changed you, before you started believing that justice only comes from authority. Price's hand moved toward his gun. Pretty speech won't save you from... Sarah's draw was invisible, impossibly fast. Price's gun went flying, her bullet having struck it perfectly. In the same motion, she had another revolver aimed at Wilson. That was warning, she said calmly. Next one won't be. Sarah, Jacob's voice held something new. Respect, maybe even pride. You still move like lightning. Had a good teacher. She didn't lower her gun. Question is, what are you teaching these men? That following orders matters more than doing right? Wilson looked uncertain now, seeing his men surrounded by Sarah's network. You're asking us to turn against our own government? I'm asking you to keep your real oath, to protect the people, not the powerful. She holstered one gun slowly. Those men you're working for, they're stealing land from honest folks, using you as their muscle. That what you signed up for, Captain? The tension stretched like a bowstring. Sarah knew everything balanced on this moment, not just her fate, but the future of the valley. Then Jacob Rose did something that changed everything. He laughed. Well done, girl, he said softly, letting his gun belt drop. You finally understood what Shadow Rose really means. Price's face contorted with rage. What are you doing? Testing her, Jacob replied. Testing all of them. Seeing if the legend could become something more than just one person's justice. He turned to Wilson. Captain, I believe you'll find these papers interesting. Documentation of the governor's land scheme, proof of corruption, gathered by an old man who never stopped believing in justice. Understanding dawned in Sarah's eyes. You were investigating them too. Had to be sure you were ready, that Shadow Rose could be more than what I made it. He smiled sadly. Your mother would be proud. Price's men started to raise their weapons, but found themselves facing not just Sarah's network, but several of Wilson's rangers as well. The captain had made his choice. Under the authority of the Texas Rangers, Wilson announced formally, you're all under arrest for conspiracy and corruption. As Price and his mercenaries were disarmed, Sarah finally lowered her gun. Tommy appeared at her side, grinning beneath his bandana. You knew? She asked her father. About the network, the training. Suspected. Hoped. He touched the rose emblem on his watch. Shadow Rose was never supposed to be just one person. Your mother understood that. Took me longer. The dawn was breaking over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and promise. Sarah watched her students, her network, emerging fully into the light, no longer hiding who and what they were. Justice, she realized, cast the strongest shadows when it stood in full sun. Victory proved shorter-lived than sunrise. As Wilson's rangers secured Price and his men, a shot cracked across the yard. Jacob Rose stumbled, red blossoming across his chest. In the chaos that followed, Sarah saw Judge Morton's son emerge from the house. He'd been hiding inside, waiting for his moment. Papa! Sarah caught her father as he fell. Tommy and Jane spun toward the house, guns raised, but Morton wasn't alone. Ravens emerged from every shadow, led by Blackwood himself. They'd been waiting, watching, choosing their moment perfectly. Drop your weapons, Morton commanded, pressing a gun to Marshal Hawkins' head. The lawman must have been caught when he tried to circle behind the house. Or the marshal dies first. Sarah's mind raced. How had they gotten inside? Then she saw Martha Miller's youngest son among the ravens, tears in his eyes. The boy had been part of her network, trusted with patrol, routes and security details. I'm sorry, he whispered. They had my brothers. Touching reunion, Blackwood sneered, gesturing at Jacob's fallen form. Shame about your father, but legends die hard in Texas. Wilson's Rangers found themselves caught in a crossfire. Sarah's network was suddenly split, unsure where to aim as more ravens appeared on the ridgeline. The simple confrontation had become a tactical nightmare. "You played your hand too soon, Shadow Rose," Morton said. "While you were all focused on Price and his men, the real power was getting into position. Governor sends his regards." "Tommy," Sarah said quietly, still cradling her father. "Remember what I taught you about tight spots?" The boy's eyes widened. Slightly. He remembered, sometimes the best defense is making your enemy think they've already won. "Smart woman," Blackwood approached, confident in his victory. "Surrender now. Maybe some of your people walk away from this. Keep fighting." He gestured at Jacob's bleeding form. Sarah looked up, letting tears flow freely. "You want surrender? Fine." She laid her guns down slowly. "Just let me tend to my father." Morton smiled cruelly. The great Shadow Rose finally showing her true colors. Weak, just like your husband was in the end. Sarah's head snapped up. "What did you say?" "Oh, you didn't know?" Morton laughed. "Your Precious Jack didn't die of fever. He found out about the silver deposits, threatened to expose everything. Governor couldn't have that. Amazing what a little poison can accomplish." The world stopped. In that moment, Sarah felt something inside her break and reform, harder than Texas bedrock. She saw Tommy's hand drop to his boot, where he kept the derringer she'd given him. Saw Jane Parker's slight nod toward the barn roof, where James Miller had their backup plan in position. "You killed Jack." Her voice was deadly quiet. "Father arranged it personally, said it was fitting. The man you gave up your legend for, dying like the coward he—" Sarah moved. Later, witnesses would say it was like lightning striking in clear sky. One moment she was kneeling, grieving. The next, Morton's gun went flying, his wrist shattered by a precisely thrown knife. Jack's knife, which she'd carried in her boot since his death. The signal was given. James Miller's dynamite charges, planted weeks ago, erupted around the Ravens' positions, not to kill but to confuse and scatter. Tommy's derringer barked, taking Blackwood in the shoulder. Jane's people emerged from hidden positions, having quietly relocated during the supposed surrender. "Papa taught me something important," Sarah said, retrieving her guns as chaos erupted. "A legend's not about who's fastest or strongest." She put 2 rounds into Morton's knees, ensuring he'd live to face justice. "It's about being willing to lose everything except your truth." Jacob Rose coughed, managing a weak smile. The wound was serious but not immediately fatal. He'd survived. Worse. "Give 'em hell, girl." The battle transformed into something personal. This wasn't about land or silver anymore. These men had murdered Jack, had poisoned a good man for daring to stand up to corruption. Sarah's network moved with cold precision, disabling and disarming with ruthless efficiency. But Blackwood had one last card to play. As his men fell around him, he produced a familiar bronze watch, taken from Jacob during the confusion. "Quite a family heirloom," he called out, holding it over the well. "Wonder if it'll tell time at the bottom of—" Sarah's bullet took him in the hand, making him drop the watch. But as it fell toward the well's depths, a small figure darted forward, Martha Miller's youngest son, seeking redemption. He caught the watch, barely a foot from the darkness. "Choice is yours, boy," Sarah said quietly. "What kind of legend do you want to be part of?" The boy looked at the watch, then at his former conspirators. His decision would shape more than just this moment. Thunder rolled across the valley as storm clouds gathered. The real battle was just beginning. Morton's confession implicated the governor himself. Powerful men would come, seeking to bury the truth, along with anyone who knew it. But as Sarah watched her father being tended by Jane, saw Tommy organizing their defenses with growing confidence, she knew something had fundamentally changed. Shadow Rose wasn't just a legend anymore. It wasn't even just a network. It was a revolution. And it was about to shake Texas to its core. The governor's response was swift and brutal. By sunset, 3 companies of state militia were marching toward the valley, led by his personal enforcer, Colonel Wade Hartford. Behind them came a train loaded with hired guns, professional killers. Drawn by the massive bounty now on Shadow Rose's head, Sarah watched them coming from the ridge, her father's bronze watch ticking steadily in her palm. Jacob was recovering at the Parker Ranch, protected by Jane's best people. The militia would reach the valley by morning. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore," Tommy said, lowering his spyglass. The boy had grown years older in the past. Days, shadows under his eyes, matching the determination in his voice. "No reason to hide," Sarah replied. "Governor's committed now. Either he buries us and his secrets with us, or he falls." She turned to study the valley that had become her home. "How many stayed?" "More than you'd expect, less than we need." Tommy consulted his notebook. He'd taken to recording everything, understanding that surviving this meant leaving a record. 32 members of the network, including Jane's group. Marshal Hawkins rallied 18 honest rangers to our cause. Wilson's keeping another dozen in reserve, watching the back trails. And the townspeople, most evacuated when we warned them. But Martha Miller's organizing the ones who stayed, setting up medical stations, supply caches. James has been teaching them basic fieldcraft, he paused. The boy who betrayed us. He's been helping too, wants to make it right. Sarah nodded. Redemption was part of the legend too. Militia numbers. 150, not counting Hartford's personal guard. Trains bringing at least that many guns for hire. Tommy's voice stayed steady, though the odds were devastating. "They'll hit us from 3 directions, trying to split our defense." "Good." Tommy blinked. "Good?" Sarah smiled grimly. "Papa taught me something about fighting superior forces. You don't try to match their strength. You make that strength work against them." She led Tommy back to the barn, now converted into their command center. Maps covered the walls, showing the valley's complex network of trails, caves, and hidden waterways. Jane Parker looked up from where she was cleaning her rifle, her face streaked with dirt and determination. "Scouts report the first mercenaries are already setting up forward positions," she reported. "They're being careful, professional. These aren't common outlaws." "Neither are we." Sarah gathered her commanders. No longer students, but hardened fighters. "They expect us to dig in, try to hold defensive positions until help arrives. So that's exactly what we're not going to do." She outlined her plan, watching their eyes widen as they understood. It was audacious, possibly suicidal, and exactly the kind of thing that had made Shadow Rose a legend. "It's crazy," Marshal Hawkins said from his corner, still favoring his wounded leg. "Might just be crazy enough to work." The next hours were a blur of preparation. Sarah's network, trained in stealth and misdirection, moved through the valley like ghosts. Careful preparations were made, traps laid, and false trails created. But the real work was happening in plain sight. Martha Miller organized the townspeople in a show of frantic fortification, boarding windows, stacking sandbags, all carefully visible to the mercenaries' scouts. Let them think the town was the target. "They're spreading out," James Miller reported near midnight, "taking up positions exactly where we predicted." Sarah nodded, checking her guns with practiced care. "And our special preparations?" "Ready. Though I still say it's risky depending so much on weather." She touched her father's watch. "Storm's coming. Can feel it in my bones, just like Papa always could." As if in response, thunder rolled across the valley. The air was heavy, with approaching rain, thick with tension and possibility. Near dawn, Sarah gathered her core team for final instructions. They were a strange army, ranchers and townspeople, reformed outlaws and honest lawmen, all united under the legend of Shadow Rose. "Governor thinks he's sending enough force to crush us," she told them. "Thinks he can bury the truth under enough bodies and bullets. But he forgot something important." "What's that?" Tommy asked. "Legends don't die easy in Texas." She looked at each face, saw the same fire that had driven her all those years ago. More than that, legends grow, change, become something bigger than any one person. Martha Miller stepped forward, her sons beside her. "They burned my ranch thinking it would break me. Instead, it made me stronger, made us stronger. One by one, others spoke, telling of lost lands, murdered families, corrupt officials who thought they could prey on the weak. Each story added fuel to the fire, strengthened their resolve. Shadow Rose started as one person's quest for justice," Sarah said finally, "grew into a network of defenders. Now—" She drew her gun, checked it one final time. "Now it's an army, and we're about to teach some powerful men why you don't underestimate Texas legends." Thunder crashed overhead as the storm finally broke. Rain poured down, turning the valley's dust to mud, obscuring vision and setting Sarah's trap in motion. "They'll attack at dawn," Hawkins predicted. "Hartford's traditional that way." Sarah nodded. "Good. Dawn's when ghosts fade away." She smiled, slightly, "unless they decide to strike first." Lightning split the sky, illuminating the determined faces around her. These weren't frightened townspeople anymore. They were soldiers in a shadow army, preparing to face overwhelming odds with something stronger than bullets, the unshakable belief that justice matters more than power. "Get some rest," she ordered. "Tomorrow we remind Texas why Shadow Rose was never just a story. It was a promise." As her people dispersed to their positions, Sarah stood in the rain, feeling its rhythm match the ticking of her father's watch. Dawn would bring violence, blood, and possibly death. But it would also bring truth, justice, and the birth of a new legend. The storm was gathering, and in Texas, storms changed everything. The rain drummed steadily on the barn roof as Sarah made her final rounds. Each stop revealed another piece of the legend being born. Martha Miller teaching townswomen to reload cartridges with swift precision. James demonstrating knife fighting. Techniques to former farmhands. Jane Parker's people methodically checking their equipment. She found Tommy in the loft, carefully maintaining his rifle, just as she'd taught him. The boy looked up as she approached, his young face serious in the lantern light. "Been thinking about Mr. Carson," he said quietly, "about what they did to him." Sarah sat beside him, felt the weight of Jack's knife at her boot. "What's on your mind?" He knew, didn't he? About the silver, about everything. Could have sold the information, made himself rich. Instead he chose to protect what mattered. Sarah drew the knife, studied its worn handle. Jack understood. Something important. Wealth isn't just about money. It's about having something worth fighting for. Movement below caught their attention. Jacob Rose was making his way through the barn, leaning on a cane, but moving with stubborn determination. Against medical advice, he'd insisted on being part of what was coming. "Your mother wore this watch into battle once," he said, touching the bronze timepiece at his vest. "During the war, when raiders threatened our town, she taught me that legends aren't born from seeking glory. They're born from protecting what's precious." Sarah descended from the loft, helped her father to a seat. "You never told me that story." "Lot of stories I should have told you." He looked around the barn, at the people preparing for dawn. "You've built something remarkable here, girl. More than I ever did with the Shadow Rose name. Built it on your foundation, Papa." She squeezed his hand. "Everything I know about justice, about standing up when others won't, learned that from you and Mama." Marshal Hawkins entered, his face grim. "Hartford's men are moving up their timeline. Weather's making them nervous." Good. Sarah checked her guns, an unconscious gesture that had become prayer-like. Means they'll be sloppy. How's our surprise? Coming? Wilson's Rangers are in position, waiting on your signal. He paused. Sarah, odds are still long. Odds don't matter much to ghosts, Jacob said softly, or to legends. The barn door opened again, admitting Jane Parker and Martha Miller. Both women carried additional ammunition, distributed it efficiently among the defenders. Last chance. To pull back, Sarah told them. No shame in protecting your families. Martha's response was fierce. This is protecting our families. My boys deserve a world where justice means something, where corrupt men can't just take what they want. Besides, Jane added with a grim smile, someone needs to remind Texas that not all legends wear badges or carry famous names. Sometimes they're just people who've had enough. The storm intensified, wind howling through the valley like lost souls. Sarah's network gathered close, sharing final instructions and quiet words of courage. These people, ranchers, townspeople, reformed. Outlaws had become something extraordinary. Something worth believing in? Miss Carson? Tommy approached, holding a bundle of black bandanas. James had an idea. Said if we're fighting as Shadow Rose's army... Sarah took one of the bandanas, felt its rough texture, like the one she'd worn 15 years ago when the legend began. One by one, her people did the same, covering their faces, becoming part of something larger than themselves. They'll hit hard, she warned them. Hartford's reputation for victory comes at a bloody price. He won't care about civilians or surrender. Neither did the raiders who killed my parents, James Miller said quietly. Neither did the Ravens when they burned our homes. Different uniform, same evil. Jacob Rose stood, leaning on his cane. Shadow Rose was born to fight that kind of evil, to remind people that justice doesn't come from power or money. It comes in from here, he touched his heart, from being willing to stand when others kneel. Lightning split the sky as Sarah checked her father's watch one final time. Hours until dawn. Hours until Hartford's men would learn what it meant to face not just one legend, but an army of shadows. Get some rest, she ordered. Check your weapons, know your positions, and remember, tomorrow isn't about revenge. It's about justice, about making sure Jack Carson didn't die in vain, about showing Texas that some things are worth any price. As her people dispersed, Sarah stood at the barn door, watching the storm rage. Tomorrow would bring violence, blood, and transformation. But tonight was for remembering why they fought, for land, for family, for a future where legends of justice still meant something. Thunder rolled across the valley like distant drums, nature's own call to battle. In the darkness, Sarah Carson, widow, legend, leader, prepared to write the final chapter of Shadow Rose's story. Dawn was coming, and with it, a reckoning that would shake Texas to its core. Dawn never came. The storm that had battered the valley all night grew stronger, turning sunrise into a murky twilight of driving rain and lightning. Through the gloom, Hartford's militia advanced in practiced formations, their lines broken by groups of hardened mercenaries. Sarah watched from the church steeple, counting numbers and positions. The enemy moved with professional precision, but their patterns betrayed their assumptions. They expected to face frightened townspeople and amateur defenders. They expected an easy victory. Right on schedule, Tommy whispered beside her, his bandana already in place. They're moving just like you said they would. Lightning flashed, illuminating the valley floor. Hartford's men had split into 3 columns, just as predicted. Their main force approached the town's obvious barricades, while smaller units moved to flank through the outlying farms. "Signal Jane," Sarah ordered. "Tell her it's time." Tommy's mirror flashed briefly, catching another lightning strike. Across the valley, similar flashes replied. Sarah's network was ready. The first shot came from Hartford's lines. A warning, volley meant to intimidate. His voice carried through the storm, amplified by a brass megaphone. "This is your last chance. Surrender Shadow Rose and her conspirators, and the rest may live." Sarah's response was a single shot that shattered the megaphone in his hands. The battle began in earnest. Hertford's men charged the town's barricades, finding them suspiciously undefended. They pushed forward confidently, not realizing they were being herded. The rain-soaked ground, carefully prepared the night before, turned to treacherous mud under their feet. "Now," Sarah commanded into the hidden speaking tube that connected key positions. The valley erupted in coordinated chaos. Hidden charges, not deadly explosives, but James Miller's special mix of black powder and wet sawdust, created walls of smoke and confusion. The militia's neat formations dissolved as men slipped and fell in the mud. Then, Sarah's network struck. Years of living in the valley had taught them every path, every hiding place. They emerged from concealed positions, struck with precise efficiency, and vanished again into the storm, just as she'd trained them. "They're not fighting like civilians," one of Hertford's lieutenants shouted. "These are military tactics." "They're fighting like ghosts," another man cried, before a perfectly placed shot knocked his rifle away. Sarah moved through the chaos like a deadly shadow, her every shot calculated. No killing blows. Shadow Rose's legend wasn't built on death. Instead, she targeted weapons, hands and knees. Each disabled fighter became a burden, requiring others to help them retreat. Tommy proved himself at her side, his movements matching hers with practiced grace. When 3 mercenaries cornered them behind the general store, the boys' quick thinking and quicker hands turned their own momentum against them. "Learned that move from Mr. Carson's journal," he said proudly as they zip-tied the unconscious men. "He wrote about using it in the war." Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with grief. Jack always said the smartest fighters were the ones who learned from everyone, even their enemies. The battle shifted as Hertford realized his mistake. These weren't random defenders fighting from fixed positions. This was a coordinated force using the entire valley as their battlefield. He ordered his men to fall back, regroup. That's when Jane Parker's group sprang their trap. The retreating militia found their escape routes cut off by deliberately felled trees and more patches of treacherous ground. Each attempt to find new paths led them exactly where Sarah wanted them. "They're boxing us in!" Hertford raged, watching his superior force slowly fragment and falter. Sarah's voice carried through the storm, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "You came to bury the truth, Colonel, to silence witnesses and hide the governor's crimes." More of her network appeared and disappeared, striking with increasing confidence. The militia found themselves facing opponents who knew every inch of the battlefield, who moved like water through the rain and darkness. "But you forgot something important," Sarah continued, picking off another gun hand with surgical precision. "Truth doesn't die easy in Texas, neither do legends." Lightning revealed the full scope of Hertford's predicament. His men were scattered, divided into isolated pockets. The superior force he'd brought to crush a simple rebellion had been transformed into desperate groups of confused fighters. "Who are you people?" he shouted into the storm. The answer came not just from Sarah, but from dozens of voices around the valley. "We are Shadow Rose." Marshal Hawkins' voice crackled through the hidden speaking tubes. "Sarah, Wilson's Rangers are in position, ready on your signal." She checked her father's watch, its steady ticking keeping time with her heartbeat. The trap was almost complete. Hertford's men had been skillfully maneuvered into the valley's central basin, known locally as Justice Hollow. "Tommy," she said quietly, "light the signal." The boy struck a match, lit the prepared torch. Its bright blue flame cut through the rain, visible across the valley. Answering flames appeared on the ridgelines. "What fresh hell is this?" Hertford demanded, watching the lights appear. Sarah's voice carried clear and cold as mountain water. This is justice, Colonel. This is what happens when you push honest people too far. The basin's steep walls suddenly filled with armed figures. Wilson's rangers on one side, honest lawmen who'd chosen truth over orders. On the other, more of Sarah's network emerged from hidden caves and trenches. Hertford's army wasn't just surrounded. They were caught in a trap generations in the making. This basin, this hollow, had been used by her father, by her mother before. Him, by every incarnation of Shadow Rose, as the perfect place to bring justice to those who thought themselves above the law. The storm reached its peak as Sarah stepped into view, her black bandana a shadow against the lightning-torn sky. Behind her stood Tommy, Jane, James, and dozens more, each wearing the same symbol of defiance. "Your choice, Colonel," she called out. "Surrender and testify about the governor's crimes, or find out why they called this place Justice Hollow." Thunder punctuated her words as Hertford realized the full magnitude of his defeat. He'd come expecting to crush a legend. Instead, he'd helped give it new life. Hertford's laugh cut through the storm's fury, a cold, deadly sound that made Tommy shift nervously beside Sarah. The colonel stepped forward, rain streaming off his uniform, his eyes gleaming with dangerous calculation. "You think this ends?" "Here," he called out. "Governor's already signed executive orders. By sundown, Texas Rangers will be riding from every county. The militia won't come." Marshal Hawkins' voice carried across the hollow. He emerged from the mist, papers held carefully dry beneath his coat. "These telegrams might interest you, Colonel. Seems some helpful soul sent evidence of the governor's land scheme to every major newspaper in Texas, and to the federal authorities." Sarah kept her guns trained steady, but allowed herself a small smile beneath her bandana. Jacob Rose's network of contacts, built over decades, had proven invaluable. Hertford's composure cracked. "You're lying." "Tell him the rest," Sarah commanded. "Second set of papers went to all your mercenaries' previous employers," Hawkins continued. "Fascinating reading. How many military men turned hired killers? How many took blood money to terrorize innocent folks? Papers are probably reaching Washington right now." The mercenaries stirred uneasily. Their reputation for deniable operations depended on secrecy. Now they faced not just defeat, but exposure. "You still don't understand," Hertford snarled, drawing his pistol with lightning speed. "This was never about land or silver. This was about power, about showing people that legends die." His shot cracked out simultaneously with Sarah's. His bullet cut through her bandana, grazing her cheek. Her shot took him in the shoulder, precise, disabling, but not fatal. The hollow erupted. Hertford's remaining loyal men opened fire, but Sarah's network had trained for this moment. They responded with disciplined precision, targeting weapons and limbs, using the terrain exactly as practiced. Tommy proved himself again, covering Sarah's advance with perfectly timed shots. Jane Parker's group moved like water through the chaos, disarming and disabling with swift efficiency. Even Martha Miller's youngest son found his courage, warning Sarah of a flanking attempt with a mirror flash. But Hertford wasn't finished. Despite his wound, he rolled behind cover, produced a small detonator. "Think I came unprepared? Enough. Dynamite under this valley to bury everyone." Sarah's blood ran cold. They hadn't found all his preparations. "That's what power means, Shadow Rose, being willing to destroy everything." "No," Sarah's voice cut through the rain. "That's what fear means." She stepped into the open, guns holstered, facing him directly. Behind her, Tommy and the others held their positions, trusting her one last time. "Power?" she continued, moving closer. "Real power is in the choices we make, the lives we protect, the truths we defend." Hertford's hand shook on the detonator. "Stay back." Jack understood that. It's why he chose to die protecting the truth rather than profit from lies. Another step. It's why every person in this valley chose to stand against you, knowing the cost. "I'll do it," Hertford's voice cracked. "I'll kill us all. Maybe Sarah was within arm's reach now. But legends don't die easy in Texas, and Shadow Rose was never just one person. She moved like lightning, but Hartford was ready. They grappled for the detonator as thunder crashed overhead. He was stronger, more experienced in brutal combat. But Sarah had something he didn't understand, the strength of absolute conviction. The detonator went flying. Hartford reached for his backup gun. 3 shots rang out as one. Hartford fell, his gun hand shattered by Sarah's bullet, his leg taken by Tommy's perfect shot, his shoulder hit by Jacob Rose's round from the ridge. "That's for Jack," Sarah said quietly, standing over him. "For every person you hurt, every life you tried to destroy." The storm began to fade as Wilson's Rangers moved in to secure prisoners. The sun broke through, revealing the full scope of what had happened in Justice Hollow. Not a massacre, not a bloodbath, but something far more powerful, the moment when ordinary people chose to become extraordinary. "It's really over?" Tommy asked, helping Sarah bind Hartford's wounds. "This part," she replied. "But legends don't end, Tommy. They grow, change, become what people need them to be." Jacob Rose approached, leaning on his cane, pride evident in his eyes. Shadow Rose was always more than a person. It was a promise that justice reaches everyone, no matter how powerful they think they are. Sarah looked around at her network. Adults, no longer students, but partners. Each face bore the quiet pride of those who'd chosen to stand against impossible odds and emerged transformed. "So what now?" Jane asked, cleaning her rifle with practiced care. Sarah smiled, touching the bandana that all of them now wore. "Now we keep the promise, not just here, but wherever it's needed, because Texas will always need its legends." The sun fully emerged, painting Justice Hollow in shades of gold and promise. Hartford's defeated men were led away, but Sarah knew this wasn't really an ending. It was a beginning of a new chapter, a new legend, a new way of defending what mattered. Shadow Rose had become more than a story. It had become a legacy, carried now in dozens of hearts, ready to rise whenever justice needed more than just law to prevail. A month after Justice Hollow, Sarah stood on her porch, watching Tommy train the newest recruits. The young man, moved with quiet confidence as he taught the same techniques she'd once taught him. The network was growing, spreading. Beyond the valley, as tales of Shadow Rose's return sparked hope in other troubled territories. "He's got your touch," Jacob Rose observed, sitting in Jack's old rocking chair. He was healing well, strong enough now to help coordinate the network's expansion, teaching them to think before they shoot. The governor's downfall had shaken Texas politics to its core. His conspiracy exposed, his allies scrambling to save themselves. Justice had come not from political power, but from ordinary people standing together. The silver mine now belonged to the valley's collective trust, its profits funding schools, hospitals, and the quiet work of maintaining justice. "Martha Miller's oldest boy rode in from Austin yesterday," Sarah reported, touching the new scar on her cheek. "Says there's talk of making Shadow Rose official, some kind of special peacekeeping force outside regular law enforcement. And told him Shadow Rose works better in shadows. Some things need to stay legendary." Jane Parker approached, leading her horse. Like many of the network's members, she now split her time between normal life and their broader mission. Riders came in from El Paso, another land scheme brewing, families being pushed off their ranches. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. "Evil doesn't stop just because we won one battle." "No," Jacob agreed, touching his mother's watch. "But now people know they're not alone in fighting it." The network gathered that evening in Sarah's barn, no longer just a command center, but a training ground for a new generation of justice seekers. Each wore the black bandana not as a disguise now, but as a symbol of what they'd become. Shadow Rose was born from one person's quest for justice, Sarah told them, grew into a family's legacy. Now it's something bigger, a promise that ordinary people can stand against corruption and win. She looked at their faces, ranchers, townspeople, reformed outlaws, all united by a shared purpose. The legend's in your hands now. Use it wisely. As her defenders dispersed into the gathering dusk, Sarah touched the rose engraving on her gun grip. Jack would have been proud of what they'd built. Not an army, not an organization, but a living legend that would endure as long as people needed hope. Justice, she'd learned, cast the longest shadows when it rose from the hearts of those who refused to bow to power. And in Texas, such shadows never truly faded. Sunset painted the valley gold on the anniversary of Justice Hollow. Sarah stood at Jack's grave, now marked with both his name and the rose symbol that had come to mean so much to so many. Tommy waited respectfully at a distance, wearing the bronze watch Jacob had passed to him that morning. "You'd hardly recognize the place now, Jack," she said softly. "Valley's thriving. People stand taller, look each other in the eye. They know they're part of something bigger than themselves." A rider approached, one of Jane's scouts, wearing the Shadow Rose bandana. "Trouble brewing in the panhandle, ma'am." Folks asking for help. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. "Get the network ready. We ride at dawn." As the rider departed, Tommy joined her at the grave. "Miss Carson, do you ever regret it? Bringing Shadow Rose back into the light?" She touched the rose engraving on her gun, then the matching symbol on Jack's headstone. "Legends only die if we let them, Tommy. As long as there are people willing to stand for justice, Shadow Rose will never fade." The sun's last light caught the silver in her hair as she turned toward home, toward tomorrow, toward the endless work of keeping hope alive in a hard land. Behind her, the rose on Jack's grave seemed to glow with remembered courage and enduring love. In Texas, they say, legends don't die, they just ride on to where they're needed most.